When I first got into this hobby 6 years ago, I made it my mission to take small plants and grow them into large statement pieces. And I still love that approach. I'm just a sucker for a big leaf. I love the journey of growing a plant to maturity and seeing the transformation that the plant goes through. And overall, I prefer quality over quantity. I'd rather take a corner of my house and fill it with just 1 or 2 really mature, well-grown specimens than having hundreds of plants that are holding on to 1 leaf for dear life. But one of the things I didn't really think through when I first set that goal was how much of a space commitment some of these plants might become. I suppose initially all of my plants were so small, the idea of them growing too large was kind of like a future worry, and I was just like, you know what, I might not even ever get there. So I just went ahead and accumulated a whole bunch of plants, and now 6 years later, I'm at times struggling to fit them into my space, which is obviously a good problem to have. But in today's video, I want to show you 10 plants that should really come with a warning when first purchasing them, because those are plants that, if grown well, will be very much of a space commitment. Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I love growing large plants. That's probably what you guys know me for. That's maybe how you found my channel, and it is definitely the reason why I am so excited about this hobby. I recently made a video where I talked about 8 plants that actually look better when juvenile, where I'm not really aiming for maturity anymore, but today we're doing the opposite. I actually want to show you 10 plants that I have grown to maturity and that I continuously grow to maturity because I very much enjoy the mature look of the plant. Long story short, I want to show off 10 amazing plants that I have grown to maturity, and yes, I said show off because that's what I'm gonna do. I'm proud of my achievements. I've grown a lot of these plants for 5 to 6 years. I have put a lot of continuous effort into these plants and made them thrive in 4 different apartments. So I want to show off, but I'm not just showing off my plants. Hopefully I'm showing off my skills as a grower. And at the same time, I hope that me showing you these plants and what they look like and how much space they take up when they're mature will help you in deciding whether or not you want to replicate their journey, or if you might be better off aiming for a lush juvenile display instead. And at the end of the video, I'll also address what we can do to mature a plant and what we can do to not mature a plant. And I've got my measuring tape, so let's find out how large these plants really are. Monstera esqueleto, and this has been one of the newer additions. And there's actually a full 2-year video about this plant coming up, I think at the end of December. So it hasn't even been in my collection for 2 years, and this plant has also never been chopped. So one of the things that I do to continuously mature my plants is my chop and extend process, which is exactly what it sounds like. I take a plant that's grown up a moss pole, I chop the moss pole in half, and I continuously grow the top part. So this plant has not gone through this process just yet. So really, I dropped a few of the bottom leaves, but you can see the sort of leaves that it started off with. Then you can really see how within just, this pole is a little bit taller than me, maybe 2 meters of pole, how within 2 meters of pole this plant has matured a lot. Now, the kicker over here is that I didn't even really give this plant amazing conditions to mature it like this. It is in a south-facing window. Keep in mind I'm in the southern hemisphere, so south is the worst exposure when it comes to light intensity. Yet, despite being in a south-facing window year-round and us just coming out of winter, well, not just, 2 months ago we finished winter, this plant has continuously matured like crazy. So all of these, apart from this latest one, all of these are winter leaves, yet you still see a significant increase in leaf size and continuously. Right, so in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to maturity, with some plants it's quite hard to achieve maturity, but with the esqueleto it seems to be very easy to achieve. So it is very easy to suddenly find yourself in a position where this plant takes up a whole wall. Right? Look at how much space it took up back there. It was very compact on the pole, whereas right now it has a massive spread. It has a very continuous pattern, right? Left, right, left, right. It really has this fan-like pattern when it comes to the leaves. So at least it's not throwing leaves in all direction. So that's somewhat reducing the spread, but let's measure anyway. So let's go with the latest leaf. Should have been fully unfurled by now. I hope I can remember all these numbers. 65 centimeters. Do I need to write them down? Let's write them down. Now the leaves in themselves aren't really the issue, because as long as the leaf is displayed nicely, you know, like, I mean, that's what we grow it for. I think when we're talking about space commitment, this spread is much more of an issue. So this plant kind of spreads from somewhere here to somewhere here. Is that fair? I think that's kind of a fair assessment from here. 120, oh my god, let's not destroy all the fenestrations. 120 centimeter spread. Let's just quickly reference my dining table. My dining table is exactly 120 centimeters in diameter. So this is dining room table size. Now again, at least it's all on one side and it has this nice fan-like structure, and I have to also say I have not yet managed these petioles, right? I could obviously tie these petioles together using twine, which you'll see happen quite frequently with subsequent plants that I'll show you, and that would obviously make the plant a little bit more compact, reducing the spread. But once you manage it once, you kind of continuously need to manage it to create a consistent display. So I haven't really gone there yet. And right now it's kind of still okay-ish as well, because all of the big spread is kind of up here. So it's not competing with furniture, for example. So it's not right next to my desk. So my desk fits in nicely down here, let's say, and these leaves aren't in the way. With the next chop, these leaves will be at the bottom. So these leaves will take up a dining room sized area on the floor, if you know what I mean. So I think with the next chop and extend, when we bring these large leaves down, that's when the space commitment might become a bit of an issue for me, and I'll have to potentially tie up the petioles, or I'm not too sure. So far, so good. I'm enjoying these leaves. I think they're definitely worth growing to maturity, because you have these huge fenestrations that are just so unique. So I think it is definitely worth growing to maturity, but definitely a word of caution. It seems to mature without me really providing it with great conditions, which makes me think that this would mature for majority of people in majority of the environments that we've got to offer. I don't think you really need to go above and beyond in supplementing conditions to optimize this plant's growth. It seems to naturally want to size up quite a lot. And looking at photos of these plants online, I see a lot of mature Monstera esqueleto growing all across the world. So I think it is one that is easy to size up. So definitely a word of caution from my end. Now, if you are worried about how much space this plant takes up and you not be able to accommodate it, maybe go for a small plant that has similar features, like the obliqua over here, right? You get something very similar. You still get these very large fenestrations, but it's more compact. These plants are actually the same age, pretty much. I got them around about the same time. So it is not a maturity issue, it's just in the plant's DNA. The obliqua will never get that large. Or you can get the Adansoniae subspecies laneata, also has really decent sized fenestrations, can mature quite nicely, but won't take up quite as much space as this one over here. Alrighty, let's park you on the side and move on to the next plant. One of my favorite plants. Most of the plants I'll show you today will be my favorite plants, but this one is really pretty. Philodendron glorious. Now, very similar story to the esqueleto. I received this plant and it matured super quickly. Out of all the velvet philodendron that I grow, this one matured the fastest. I don't know the exact time frame anymore. Editing yarn is probably a little bit smarter. Now, I got this as a one-node cutting, but the cutting came from quite a mature chunk. So I think mine matured quite fast because it was a mature cutting that it came from, yet it was still, you know, a one-node unrooted cutting. So it's not like I bought an established plant. The first few leaves were still quite small, but it matured and increased in leaf size quite quickly. And again, without me really putting a lot of effort into the conditions compared to a verrucosum that we're going to see later on. This plant doesn't seem to be all too fussed about the conditions, or let's say hardier when it comes to lower humidity, slightly less light and so on. In general, I would say velvet philodendron don't need all too much light to mature. They prefer the bright indirect light, the dappled light, which should be much easier to achieve in an indoor setting in the first place. So overall, I think when it comes to velvet philodendron, Philodendron glorious should be the one that has the most potential to size up and size up quickly on top of that. But that's not a bad thing, because I think with this plant, a lot of the stunningness, I don't know, I think that's a good word, comes from the size of the leaves. Of course, they're nice and dark, they have a beautiful velvet sheen, they have nice veining, they have a nice shape. The plant doesn't really change with maturity either, right? Like it kind of always looks like that. The leaves just get bigger. So I think in this instance, a bigger leaf actually looks better. Whereas sometimes with maturity, the plant changes a lot and loses some desirable features. This one just keeps the desirable features. It just becomes bigger with its desirable features. And it just has this beautiful bounce. I can't stop shaking it. So this plant reached maturity quite quickly. And then from there on, it's really about perpetuating the same growth, right? Which is worth it, in my opinion. I had a bit of a setback maybe 2 years, a year and a half ago, because the plant grew off the pole. It has quite a thick stem, so it grew off the pole and I was too late in manipulating it, and then 5-6 nodes in a row grew off the pole, which means that my chop and extend method didn't work anymore, because the chop and extend relies on the plant having rooted into the pole to start off with. But here you can see there's some nice chunky roots that this plant is growing into the pole, right? And then that becomes essential when I want to chop it. So over the years, this plant has probably gone through 3 or 4 chop and extends, but one of them wasn't really true to the nature of the chop and extend, because I didn't root the plant into the pole ahead of time, which caused a few setbacks. But overall, I would say over the last 3-4 years, I'm growing the same plant. It's not really maturing any further, which makes me think that I maxed out this plant's DNA, but I'm still very much enjoying this plant, and I'm happy to commit a bit of space to this plant because I just think it is so impactful. Perfect example of quality over quantity. This plant has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This plant only has 7 leaves. I think I could cut off a few of the older ones because they're getting a little bit of visual damage. But with just 7 leaves, I can fill a whole corner, I can fill a whole wall, and it looks like an artwork, right? It looks like a sculpture rather than looking messy. I like a rather clean aesthetic, yet I still want to live in a jungle. So a bit of an oxymoron, but I think growing large statement pieces like this is kind of the perfect example. Now, to minimize the spread of this plant, I have tied these petioles to the pole. The problem with this plant isn't necessarily the leaf size. Let's have a look. And let's just always go with the latest leaf, let's say. I think maybe some of the bottom ones are a little more mature, but let's go with this regardless. 72 centimeters. I forgot to take notes already. Now, because I'm managing the petioles, I'm very much managing the spread, right? So this plant doesn't spread quite as much. We've got from here all the way to here, which is only 95 centimeters. But most importantly, I think what I want to measure on this plant is the petiole length, because that's really the main issue with this plant. This petiole is 81 centimeter long, which means that a leaf that originates down here is then expanded 81 centimeters into the air, and then we've got the little lobes as well, which is another 20 centimeters, which means that this plant reaches the ceiling and bumps into the ceiling quite quickly, despite the fact that the plant hasn't matured very high up on its pole. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. I would say it doesn't spread so much horizontally like the esqueleto did. This one is more of a vertical spread, and it can fill the vertical space quite quickly, which is most likely what we are after. Now, the reason I tie these petioles to the pole isn't just to reduce the horizontal spread this way. These petioles would just go straight forward. Eventually they would kind of be 90 degrees with the pole, which means that they would feed so deep into the room that they would actually take up dining room sized areas in my house. Petioles, definitely something to be mindful of. Obviously, because we're visual people, we're looking at the leaves and we're so focused on the leaves, and from your perspective you can't even see the petioles in the first place. But I think petiole length is the #1 issue in creating nice displays and fitting plants into your house. I think leaves aren't really the issue, because leaves make the plant look good. The petioles don't add anything to the plant visually, yet are the very thing that take up all the space, if you know what I mean. Okay, let's put this back. It would be nice to create a little backdrop by the end of the video, huh? Gorgeous! Alright. This is like a workout. A lot of these plants are quite heavy. Let's bring out the next one. Alrighty, next up we've got Philodendron sharoniae. Now this is a plant that I haven't had that initial success with, like I did with the esqueleto and the glorious. With those two, I just popped them on a moss pole and they just matured really easily for me. This plant, not so much. I actually didn't have any success with this plant over the first 2 years, and only last year, when I was so fed up with this plant that I just chucked her in my garden, is when she actually matured. So all of these mature leaves you see grew in my garden last year. I then brought her inside over winter, and over winter she continued growing with just one leaf that is a little bit smaller. This tear over here is from the outside world, you know, it gets bashed around by the wind a little bit. And now it is, yeah, I think it might have grown this one indoors as well, but these larger ones are all from outside last year. Now I popped her back outside now that we're in spring, and hopefully she's starting to grow some large leaves yet again. But yeah, overall I would say that this plant is definitely a bit of a space commitment now that she has matured. It was definitely a challenge to fit her inside to overwinter, because you know it's a plant that takes up quite a lot of space that wasn't there before. But I think it was definitely worthwhile. But on a positive note, compared to the esqueleto and the glorious, I feel like it's going to be much harder to mature this plant if you grow it indoors only. I think it requires a lot more light input than the other two to mature, and it really seems to enjoy the subtropical conditions in Sydney's summer. Cannot handle Sydney's winter. The bottom part of this pole died in the garden over winter, so I'm glad I took it inside. So it's kind of like a positive and a negative. It most likely won't even mature quite as much if you just grow it indoors without heavily supplementing conditions. But at the same time, I feel like this plant didn't look that nice when it was juvenile. I really like the mature leaves. I think this is really what you want to grow it for. But with these mature leaves, you guessed it, long petioles, space commitment. So let's measure this one. 68 centimeters. Let's look at the petiole length. Because the spread isn't that bad. bad, right? Again, actually I can bring this much closer. You can see how much I'm managing the petioles over here with twine, and I've got a whole video on how I style my plants using that. But basically there's no method to my madness. I just take twine, wrap it around petioles, around the pole, around each other until I'm happy with the look. But let's have a look at this longest petiole over here from this last summer leaf. 88 centimeter petiole size. That is even longer than the glorious. That is crazy. You can see this plant isn't even that far on its moss pole. It went through one chop in extent, but it's only here on its moss pole, so not even halfway. But some of these leaves exceed the moss pole by a lot, right? So again, a lot of vertical space commitment. I'm lucky I've got a garden where I can just put this plant, because obviously I have much more space available in the garden than indoors. But yeah, I don't know, if I would be only growing indoors, I don't actually think I would get this plant, because I don't think I would get the nice features out of the plant. And even if I did, then I wouldn't really know what to do with it anymore, because it's taken up too much space. I'm very happy I've got it in my collection. I'm very happy that it matured. But I'm even happier that I can just chuck it outside in my garden again. Building up a nice little wall, aren't we? Ooh, this is gonna be a pain. Ah! See what I mean with long petioles? Alrighty, let's group these two together, because in the grand scheme of things, they are more similar than they're different. This is Philodendron Florida Ghost and Philodendron Florida Beauty. These started off as teeny tiny plants, and they were so cute initially, and obviously you grow this plant for the variegation. The Florida Ghost works kind of like light induced. The more light you give it, the lighter it gets, and then it fades to green over time. The Florida Beauty has more the traditional variegation that we know. It is random, yellow on green, and yeah. I think at times the Florida Beauty was my favorite, but recently the leaves are getting a little bit too large for themselves. I don't really have a way to display them, so the leaves start pointing in all sorts of directions. I don't really have this beautiful display site anymore, and the leaves don't really have enough like oomph. I don't know. I think she needs something, I just don't know what she needs. So recently, don't fall. Recently I started liking the Florida Ghost a little bit more, because I actually really like these minty leaves that it's giving me at the top over there. So between those two, it always changes which one I prefer. You know what, you don't need to choose a favorite, you can just grow both. But I do grow both, and the only reason I can tolerate them both is because I grow them right next to each other, and I kind of intertwine their petioles like this, so that together they don't take up too much space. If I would grow them next to each other without the petioles touching, they would take up this much space, like from here all the way to here. That is 2.6 meters. 2.6 meters, that's longer than my bed. It's bigger than my freaking couch. Now, of course, I also only single planted them. Maybe if I double planted them, they would look a little bit better. But I think for this much spread, there's too much emptiness on the pole. That's why I like to just overlap them a little bit like that. And because they look more similar than they look different, I feel like it actually works, you know? And they have the same petiole lengths and so on, so it kind of works the way that I display it when I just intertwine them. However, I do cause a little bit of damage to some of the petioles and leaves when I do that, and especially when I will need to separate them because I take them out or something like that. That's usually when I rip leaves a little bit. But overall, I think this way it works. But when I first got these plants, they were so small, and I got them because of the leaf shape and because of the variegation. I was actually unaware of the petiole size. With the glorious, for example, I was fully aware that it's going to grow quite large and spread. But at least with those petioles, you know, I kind of tie them upright to the pole, so the petiole kind of just runs along the moss pole. With these ones, I can't really do that. Like, the petioles are not rigid enough. They're kind of bent, if you know what I mean. Like, I've tried tying them up, but all that happens, one of the moments when, all that happens is that the petiole just becomes like wavy and weird and ugly. So I can't really take these petioles and turn it into a vertical space commitment. They will stay a horizontal space commitment, and that was not expected, to be honest. And I'm not too sure if the mature leaf shape makes up for it, because I think this shape looks good, but then eventually they become too large. Or maybe, I think it's not just the shape that's wrong with it, I think it needs something. I think it's just looking a bit sad. This one could be okay, it's a new leaf, it still needs to unfurl. But this one has been there for a while. But now it also spreads so far that not all leaves get a lot of light. It's supported by a grow light right behind me over here, so these leaves at the top get a lot of light, but as soon as they move out too far, no more light for them. Anyway, let's measure a petiole. This petiole is 57. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know if I'm happy with the petiole to leaf ratio, and if the leaves make up for the petioles, and if the horizontal spread of the petioles is something I can cope with. For now, the only solution I have is putting them together like this, as I mentioned, and then have the grow light in the middle, so at least they also share grow light, but I still have a spread of approximately 180 centimeters. That's a human. So yeah, I've got them over there in that corner where I don't really know what other plant to put. I'm more and more thinking about where I can put this plant, especially if they're continuously mature. This is the only extensions I've ever done on them. I have not done a chop and extend, so this is all the plant that I've ever had. If they grow larger and spread even more, I just honestly don't know where to put them. There's just something about not being able to create a nice aesthetic display that's bothering me with this plant. So, oh well, I'll stop bitching and moaning now, and I'll just accept it for what it is. Alright, next one on the list, Monstera constellation. Now, her being a space commitment is probably not a surprise to anybody, because she's a large form Monstera deliciosa, and they can grow really, really large. Now, very similar to the esqueleto, this plant has this perfect, can we see this? Yes, fan-like split. So leaves go left, right, left, right, left, right. And that adds to the space commitment. Let's have a look. Each petiole is 54 centimeters. I'm going to stop taking notes, by the way. I don't know what I'm going to do with the notes anyway. And 58, yeah. So overall, including the leaf, this plant has 160 centimeters spread. Yet, I'm lucky that this leaf hasn't moved yet, but this leaf is going to move to the side, which means that eventually I'm kind of just looking at like a somewhat empty pole. The pole itself, all you see is like petiole, 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 because all of the leaves are going to be left and right of the pole. So it is definitely a plant where you want to probably pin these petioles together a little bit to bring them forward, to first of all reduce the horizontal spread that it has, and second of all kind of hide the pole in the middle. But that's not necessarily how this plant naturally wants to grow. And it has very, very rigid petioles that aren't as easy to manipulate as the glorious, for example. The leaves themselves can also be a bit of a space commitment. This one is 60 centimeters, and it's not even close to actually being really mature. I would say this is still a little more like teenage stage. Now, I still think it's worth it, and I think it makes a stunning statement piece. Imagine you just have one big wall and you put that there. It looks stunning. It has fenestrations, it has variegation, it has all of the features in the world that you want. It grows quite slowly, at least in my opinion, so it's not a whole lot of work. It tolerates drying out, so it makes a great plant, and it's a very popular plant. So I wanted to include it to give you a word of caution that, hey, this plant can, if grown to maturity, become a huge space commitment, much bigger than just what you see over here. So maybe keep that in mind. Is that really worth it? Do you maybe go for a small form elbow instead that won't quite mature as much? It will grow with larger internodal spacing, so grow more horizontally versus the Thai growing a little bit more vertically. Now you can grow a large form deliciosa as a crawler as well, but then it takes up even more space. So that's why last year I converted it from a crawler to being a climber. And I like it and I love that I have this plant, but it does take up almost the same size as my dining table. So it takes up that east-facing window that I've got there. That east-facing window is reserved for just the Thai and my elbow. So just 2 plants take up that whole window, and I only have 2 windows in my whole living room. So a space commitment, and a space commitment ultimately turns into the need to compromise. If you need to commit that much space to one plant, you can't have all the plants in the world. Which is maybe something you're after. Maybe you're also going for quality over quantity, but just keep in mind that growing plants like this and growing to maturity will eventually need you to maybe get rid of some other plants that you don't fancy quite as much. You can't have it all. You can't have quantity and quality yet live in a tiny space. Maybe nobody wanted it all. I'm just assuming, because it's the internet and it's 2025. Usually people want it all. Alright, where put this? I need to put this on this side. Let's head into the garden, switch it up a little bit, and then we come back to wrap it up with some of my absolute favorite plants of all time. Alrighty. Hello, darling. Look at him. Look at this baby. Yes, your baby. You enjoying it out here? Okay, I was hoping for the sun to go down a little bit. It's not, so we're just gonna do it and hope for the best. Next one, my blood banana. Look at this newest leaf. It was eaten by caterpillars. Oh no, but look how beautiful this plant is. Now, I've had this plant for a long time, and last year it was really suffering. So I put it out in the garden, and turns out that was a blessing in disguise. It is obviously growing well in the garden. It just came out of winter as well. So I think the last 3 or 4 leaves are spring leaves, but yeah, it survived winter out here just perfectly fine. And it has grown this little pup down here as well. That is maybe a little bit easier to see for you guys. I keep bumping into everything with this plant. That's better, no? I mean, look at this. Now this plant is just a crazy space commitment. Can you see anything? Now I'm glad that I got this plant used to my outdoor conditions because, well, first of all, I don't think it would have ever really grown that well indoors. Also, spider mites really love this plant. But secondly, where would I put this plant while still getting it the conditions that it needs? This is obviously a plant that would love to grow in full sun or a lot of sun, and it would love for the sun to come from the top so it doesn't lean to one side. Where am I gonna get that much sun coming from the top indoors while also still living in that place? You know what I mean? Again, dining room comparison come to mind. This one leaf is 150 centimeters long. So if it has one in every direction, which it does, this is a 3-meter space commitment. Okay, I suppose the little bend takes away from the 3 meters. So maybe let's say 2.5. But it hasn't even fully matured yet, right? Even this small plant over here, which I think would easily be achievable inside, maybe just take you a little while longer, 140 centimeters, so still quite a lot of commitment to the space. So let me put this back so I can focus on you guys. I think bananas are great plants to grow. They make things look very tropical. There's lots of different bananas as well, and I know that some bananas can even handle frost as well. We don't get frost over here, so I don't need to worry about it, but technically it would. And especially when I was in America, a lot of people were really keen on getting bananas at the IAS last year. Was it last year? Yes. especially, what is it, the Musa Nono, I think, so some pink one, and then obviously the traditional like white variegated one has always been a bit of a unicorn in the plant world, right? So it is not unheard of for people to grow bananas as house plants. I just think they're way too much of a space commitment unless you've got an outdoor area available where the plant can spread horizontally a lot and thrive properly. I don't think it's worth growing a banana. But ultimately you decide. Maybe if you have a really beautiful skylight and a really large place that you want to fill, then maybe a banana is actually a good candidate for you. But yeah, I just think the plant looks stunning. It has amazing variegation. It gives this really nice tropical feel. It grows quite quickly. It's just a crazy space commitment. So if I move house and I don't have a garden available, I will not be able to bring this plant with me for sure. It is this garden or nowhere. And the exact same applies to this plant. Let me see if I can still get it out. Oh my god, where's my phone? You have got to see this. Okay, you see how root bound it is on top over here? Well, have a look at this. Look at the roots sticking out the pot over here. Oh my god, so heavy. I don't think the camera really shows how thick they are. Like really, really thick. Like as thick as those ones at the top here. Alright. Maybe this way the plant's true size is showing a little more. This is the Thaumatophyllum bipinnatifidum. Oh, sorry baby. I know what I steady doing. Now I've had this plant for a long time. And this plant is also often grown as a house plant as well. Often referred to as Philodendron cellum as well. It's not a philodendron, it's got reclassified as Thaumatophyllum. And when you grow it inside, it will not mature like that unless you give it a lot of light. They grow wild on the street over here in full sunlight, and that's when you get the full potential out of them. But some people have a lot of light indoors, so be careful. I mean, each leaf is around 1 meter long. With the petiole, it is 155. So overall, the spread from this end of the plant to this end of the plant is, yeah, I mean, I could have done the maths, but it's 3 meters. Again, that's like couch, or do you want this plant? And this plant has very rigid, really thick petioles as well. In this instance, it actually all faces in one direction because I have it sitting right here and the sun comes from over there. So they all face the light basically. So I'm reducing the spread a little bit, but imagine this going in 360 degrees, which is this natural growth pattern. Your whole garden is taken up by one plant. So that's why I had to push it into one corner so that at least I eliminate the other half. So yeah, when I first saw people growing these as houseplants, I was a bit shocked because I was like, oh my god, like, do they know how large they're gonna get? Now, is it realistic? I think so. If you do have a lot of light available and you give it time, I do think it's realistic to get quite a large spread out of this plant and get this plant to somewhat mature. I'm bonsaiing the plant in that pot. As you can see, it's super, super root bound. Imagine I would actually give this more room to expand its root system. It would mature even further. And it does have some setbacks over winter over here. It lives out here year round. Of course, I can't move it inside anymore. It's way too large. So yeah, it's for some reason a plant that I see growing quite commonly as a houseplant, which makes no sense to me. 1 second. If you want that sort of look, why not go for Thaumatophyllum xanadu? It has a very similar growth pattern, right? Just much smaller leaves, to be honest, nicer leaves and more interesting backsides with these red veinings as well. You can see it all started as one one stem over here, and then it just split itself. So now I have 3 heads at the top over here, giving me this really lush, beautiful, almost like a firework, right? This makes sense to grow as a houseplant because you can grow it to its full potential, you can make it thrive without it taking up too much space. If you grow the plant behind me to its full potential, you probably won't have space to fit it in your space anymore. So you would purposely need to grow the plant not to its full potential, purposely expose the plant to insufficient conditions, bonsai it and so on, and then the plant might not even grow at all and just slowly deteriorate or grow really slowly. So with this you can get fast growth, lush growth, continuous growth without really having to worry about it outgrowing its space. So if you want a Thaumatophyllum, if you want something really hardy, go for a Xanadu if you don't have enough space available. Alrighty, we're back inside and we're back with one of my current favorites. Still a work in progress, but this is Philodendron titanium. It is a hybrid of Philodendron verrucosum and Philodendron serpens, and I think it has some of the most beautiful leaf shapes out there. Perfect, rounded heart. It has these really interesting sheen, not quite velvet, but not leathery, and it has these stunning red backs with amazing hairy petioles. Now, straight up, you can see I heavily manage these petioles these days. Wasn't always the case. This leaf, for example, you should be able to see some distinct yellow discolorations. I think some of them might be overwatering, but overall it gotten too close to the grow light. With time, these petioles don't neatly point up anymore. Instead, they go pretty much 90 degrees off of the pole. So this leaf was pointing in this direction and got too close to the grow light. So I had to start taking petiole twine, and now I'm slowly starting the journey of maneuvering these petioles to point more up, right? So I think I can do a little bit more. I'll just tighten the twine in the back a little bit and move it up further. Sometimes I do it in kind of like 2 stages, like I do today, so the plant has a bit of time to get used to the new positioning and I don't snap anything. So when the leaves first come out, the petioles still point up, so going forward I want to be more proactive in managing these plants and manage the petiole before the petiole starts drooping, so I keep creating a nice display similar to the glorious. Now what this does, of course, is it leaves the bottom part quite empty, right? If I tie this petiole up as well, you end up seeing a lot of pole, not a lot of plant, or the plant is very much at the top over here, which is not necessarily that beautiful if you look at each plant individually, but it gives me room to put a smaller plant down below as part of a display. So I don't mind it, but maybe if you grow this plant in isolation, you wouldn't want to manage the petioles in this sort of way. Ultimately up to you. Now this plant is also relatively new. I got it, I think, around about the same time as the esqueleto, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. And I didn't have the highest hopes on this plant because it's a hybrid that I was actually unfamiliar with when I first got it. I was gifted this plant. I didn't even know it existed, to be honest. So I just popped it on a pole and it continuously matured super well for me. So it grew quite nicely, which in general is an experience I have with a lot of hybrids. I find that the species, so in this instance serpens, I've never had success with. Verrucosum I've had success with, but it's very hard to grow. They're much harder to grow than the hybrid titanium. Same with the glorious. The glorious is a hybrid of Melanochrysum and Philodendron gloriosum. I struggle much more with the species than I struggle with the hybrid, and it comes back to what my friend Hannah Montana said ages ago. You get the best of both worlds, right? So you get this hybrid vigor, where usually hybrids, keep in mind, they might also be selected for in the first place. They might have created a bunch of seeds and they're selected for the seeds that had the most vigor, right? So in general you get more resilience, faster growth speed and so on, usually with hybrids, rule of thumb. So it sized up much faster than expected, and I honestly didn't even have time to like find a good spot for it and so on to actually display it nicely. So I think it has great DNA, it sizes up nicely, but I'm not happy with how I have managed the plant's visuals throughout its life cycle, let's say. So I gotta work on this a little bit to reduce the visual damage by leaves being too close to grow lights and so on. So yeah, it's a work in progress, it's a space commitment, but space I'm willing to commit because I think it's just one of the most beautiful plants that has just amazing, stunning features. And it doesn't lose these features with maturity. Over time, yes, the red fades. New leaves still emerge with this very incredible red, even though they're mature, right? So there's no feature that kind of disappears with maturity. So I think maturity is still something to aim for over here. I just got to be a little bit more mindful in the way that I display it. But let's do the petiole test again. Petiole over here is only 70 centimeters, so quite short compared to some of the previous candidates. And the leaf is 65. Very decent size. So overall, I think now that I managed the petioles, it doesn't spread so much horizontally in this dimension. I think the worst part was the spread forward, which is still horizontal, but you know what I mean. If you have them on a wall, it's not that it spreads so much across the wall, it spreads into the room, let's say. And especially where you have a strategic light source coming from the front, that's going to be a bit of an issue because the leaf that spreads the furthest is going to take up all the light and get burned, while the leaves that are still close to the pole won't receive enough light. I think we're already on the second last one, aren't we? This is Philodendron esmeraldense. Kind of similar-ish to the sharoniae, but I think this will take the win on longest petiole. For the longest time, wasn't really the biggest fan of this plant because it grows quite slowly and it climbs quite slowly, which is a good thing if you don't want to go through frequent chop and extents. This is actually the original pole this plant has been on, and I think it's been over 3 years. I extended the pole, but not because the plant is reaching that part. I only extended it so that I have leverage to tie up the petioles, right? Because what am I going to tie it to? If I tie it to something down below, I have less leverage, right? I need something on petiole height or leaf height to tie these to. So at this extension, at this stage, is only visual, you know, I need visual assistance. So for the longest time, the plant was somewhere down here, but the leaves are still already up here, and it had very little structure, and it was just kind of every time I moved this plant outside for like watering, or even just because I rearranged my wall of aeroids, it would just go in all directions. These petioles, especially when they're all tied up now, so I can't show you, and I don't want to untie my work, but when they first come out, these petioles literally fling around in all directions. When the leaf unfurls, it like unfurls here. The next day the petiole is there. Like, I don't know what it does, but it like flings around looking for light. I have no idea what it does, but I've never seen that with any other plant to the extent like this one does it. Literally, like one day the petiole's pointing in like the wrong direction with the leaf hanging upside down, and the next day it's over there and so on. And guess what? If a huge petiole flings around in all directions within the course of a few days, it sure as hell is going to brush against something. Hey, look at this! See over here, brushed against other poles, against cable ties of other poles, which fair enough is obviously also partially my fault, you know, but I've never had it with any other plant where so many leaves just have visual damage. Ooh, oh well, I just made it worse. Where so many leaves have just visual damage, mechanical damage. The plant is healthy. I didn't do anything wrong or whatever. It's just that these leaves are too big and pointing in all directions and are too volatile and move around too much for them to really end up looking pristine by the time the plant is done unfurling it. I'm trying my very best with this petiole over here. I took it and tied it. This is the newest leaf. I took it and tied it up straight away, but see how as a response to being tied up, the plant is now just growing kind of like a wonky petiole instead. So if you tie it up when it's still too young, you kind of impact the plant's development, or like the leaf's development, I feel like. So usually I like to wait for the leaf to have at least unfurled. See how you end up with this sort of stuff. You know what I mean? I don't want this. So usually I like to wait for the plant to have unfurled and expanded that leaf fully and only then tie it up. But I had to start doing it a little bit earlier on in the journey to hopefully get some of these leaves to stay pristine. I love the leaves though. I think they're so sexy, and for a non-velvet plant, this is one of my favorites, I have to say. It's just so beautiful. This one I used the leaf shine on, and I have to say I kind of hate it. I think it looks too fake. I prefer it looking a little bit more natural and less shiny, so I stopped after one leaf. And I won't repeat that. So yeah, I think it's a stunning plant. If I would have to choose one plant to get rid of out of all the ones I showed you so far, I would probably choose this one. Out of the lineup so far, it's my least favorite, but I really wanted to include it because I think we can set a new record on petiole length. I should have probably been a little bit more consistent taking notes. The last note I took was 88 centimeters petiole length for the Sheza, and I think that was the longest one as well, but I think we can beat that. Let's not go with the latest leaf because the latest leaf is still unfurling and thus the petiole is still unfurling as well. Let's go with this leaf over here, the second latest one. It literally starts here. No, it's the third latest one. No, this one. This one. Sorry, it starts here. Is it this leaf? Yeah. It starts here. Petiole, 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 petiole. It ends here. 98 centimeters. That fucking petiole is a meter long. My moss pole is only 90 centimeters long. So if I plant this plant at the bottom of a pole, the petiole already exceeds the top of the moss pole. And then you've got the lobes that add another 15 centimeters. So this plant is going to reach the ceiling, and these leaves are going to bounce into the ceiling by the time this plant has just reached like halfway up its pole. Of course, that wouldn't be the case if I don't manage the petioles. You can see this on this baby plant. There's a second plant down here, and you can see this on this plant down here. These petioles don't usually stick up like this naturally. They want to lower and kind of turn again into this 90-degree angle with the pole, which is cute with this little leaf. But imagine having that 1 meter petiole coming off of the pole. The leaf would be hanging here, where I am. So I tie these petioles closely to the moss pole to create at least a compact display. And that way, you know, this one next to my titanium, next to my glorious and so on, it kind of works, you know. And again, it looks a little bit empty at the bottom, but I can just put a smaller plant down there and it works as a display. Whether it works as just one specimen, it's not ugly, for sure not, but each leaf is not really that pretty. It probably looks better on camera than it looks in real life, but I think it looks good in a collection because it's a little different to the plants that I showed you before. Beautiful shape, beautiful color. Alrighty, and we're moving on to the last plant, which also is my favorite plant of all time. I'm gonna go into the office to go and grab it, which takes a little bit longer than expected, which gives you a little bit of time to guess which plant it might be. Are you done guessing? Okay, because I'm coming. Ta-da! Philodendron verrucosum. If you guessed that correctly, give the video a thumbs up down below. If you guessed incorrectly, also give this video a thumbs up. Thank you. My favorite plant of all time. It's been also one of my first plants, and it's not just because the plant is sexy as hell that I love this plant. Look at the veining. Sexy, the sheen, the velvet, sexy, the red backs, sexy, the hairy petioles, so sexy. It also makes great hybrids like the titanium, like the splendid, like the verrucosum. I think those are all the hybrids I've got, isn't it? Good enough for now. It has such desirable features that, of course, why wouldn't you want to turn it into a hybrid? But also it's just a sentimental value. It was one of my first plants that I ever bought. It was one of the first plants I put on a moss pile. It was one of the first plants I did a chop and extend with, that I cut single node cuttings with and propagated and sold them on to get more plants into my collection. So if it wasn't for this plant and the propagation success I've had with this plant, I would have not bought that many plants, right? Like, one of the rules that I had at the beginning of my plant journey is that I was trying to recoup the cost of plant purchases through propagation. Only once I've recouped the cost, I go ahead and buy another plant, or I swap a plant for another one, so there is no cost involved, and so on, right? So I wanted to be responsible and reasonable with this hobby from the beginning, and if it wasn't for plants like that gave me so much joy and success, I don't think I would have gotten as deep into the hobby. So love this plant. I love it so much. I have 3 of them. This is my mature mother plant. I then have a more compact plant, and I have a small trailing plant. Now this plant does not look the best if you look at it in full. Very empty bottom, but nice lush top. Again, works for the display because down below I, for example, have my Philodendron patriciae that then fills this gap nicely, and this plant just fills the top nicely. So it adds a little bit more variety on my wall of aeroids overall. Now the reason why this bottom part is so empty is because verrucosum leaves don't last very long. They go yellow quite quickly. You can see it over here. It can be a combination of spider mites. Spider mites love this plant, but also if they get too close to the light, they can get a little bit yellowish, right? So the leaves don't last and look pristine for really long, so I frequently chop them off, and with maturity the plant isn't growing that fast. So this plant has probably been on this pole for 2 years or so, but each leaf only looks nice for maybe half a year. So obviously eventually all the bottom leaves will be chopped off to not look so ugly. But I think each leaf in itself is just so worth the real estate that it takes up. Now the real estate that it takes up is not just because of the leaves, it's, surprise surprise, because of the petioles. This plant is so incredibly top heavy, I can't actually let go of it anymore. It's wedged into my corner in the office. It's the only way I can keep this plant alive and stop from falling over. It actually fell recently, and it survived. 72 centimeters in petiole length, so definitely up there, but not a winner. The reason I don't manage these petioles, you see I don't tie them up. I used to, but the reason I try to avoid that, and it was the reason why I avoided it with the titanium from the beginning as well, is that when I do tie them up like I intended over here, I just get rid of all of the hair on the petiole, right? So it's not that good. So I stopped doing it, and now that it's so tall and up here, it's not competing with anything anyway, so I'm not really worried. But with the next chop and extend, once I take these sleeves and they're now back on bottom floor height, I'm concerned. I'm not too sure what I'm gonna do with this and how I'm going to accommodate all of this, but we'll find out, I suppose. Now the good thing with this plant over here is that it takes a long time to mature. This is the most mature it's ever been, and I've had it for 5-6 years. And it seems to be a hard one to mature because setbacks are frequent due to frequent spider mite infestations. I think this one is the polar opposite to a glorious, for example. A glorious should size up quite easily, whereas the verrucosum doesn't size up quite easily. So it should be easy enough to keep this juvenile while still keeping it somewhat pretty. Alrighty, and here we are. Keep in mind, right behind me is actually only 9 plants. And the Florida Beauty and Florida Ghost have kind of been merged into one. So technically 8-ish. The other 2 are honestly too large to even get through the door to bring them inside. So I figured let's leave them out of the group photo. Now, apart from the sharoniae, all of these plants you see behind me are actually grown indoors. And as you can see, they are currently taking up pretty much my entire living room. So these plants are definitely a space commitment, but a space commitment I'm more than willing to make because I absolutely love these plants. I'd much rather get rid of 10 or 15 of my smaller plants to make room for one of these larger plants, because these are some of my favorite plants, and ultimately it is quality over quantity. Now luckily this is my job, so I get to do a bit of both. I get to keep all of the large quality plants, and I get to grow quite a lot of smaller plants for the sake of videos and so on. But I still catch myself getting plants, not really thinking about the future space commitments some of these plants might pose. I mean, some of them I don't really grow successfully anyway, so I don't really have to worry about the space that they might take up when they mature. But some of them I matured much faster than expected without maybe even aiming for it. So I hope this video offers a bit of both. Hopefully it's entertaining and motivating, so maybe it makes you want to grow some of your plants to maturity as well. But on the other hand, hopefully it also gives you somewhat of a heads up where you realize that actually maybe growing some of these plants to maturity isn't necessarily the goal to start off with, so you can change your approach before it's too late. Now, to get your plants to maturity, very simple tips. First of all, you gotta grow them in line with their native growing conditions. So conditions are light, humidity, airflow, and temperature. Most of my plants that I like to grow are tropical plants, so they don't like anything under 15 degrees Celsius. Most of them love it more on the high humidity side, so around 60% plus. And most of them don't like full direct sun because they usually would grow in the understory of the rainforest. So they more prefer like this dappled light, and I provide that via grow lights, and I have all of my grow light recommendations down in the description. The conditions set the potential, and then it's on you to realize that potential, and you realize the potential that the conditions have set by continuously caring for the plant. I think the key word here is continuously, right? Some of these plants have been with me for 5-6 years now, and yes, some of them had setbacks and then they come back obviously because it's been 6 years and so on, but they are only a reflection of the work that I'm willing to put in right now. The fact that I cared for some of these plants really well 3 years ago is actually irrelevant for the plant's well-being today. If I stop watering these plants for a month, they're all dead. That's it. So it's about continuously caring for them. So you really gotta choose plants that you also continuously care about, right? If you choose a plant that you feel a little bit indifferent about, you probably won't continuously care for that plant to your best ability for it to thrive for 6 years in a row, right? Now, consistent care doesn't mean more is more. It means be smart around your plant care. Water when required. Don't do too much, don't do too little. Read the signs that your plants give you. Be proactive with your watering. Clean leaves are healthy leaves. They have an easier time fighting back pests. If you notice pest damage, treat your plants straight away. Don't be too slack and let the infestation grow before you start getting on top of it, and so on. Of course, grow it in line with the plant's growing pattern, so grow it up a moss pile. Make sure that the plant roots into the moss pile. Keep the moss pile moist. Stay on top of your chop and extend processes. Most of these plants would have gone through at least 1 chop and extend. Some, like the verrucosum, would have probably gone through 5 chop and extends by the time they reach maturity. So you gotta make sure the plant continuously roots into the moss pile so you can continuously chop and extend the plant as well. Provide nutrients. For a plant to grow to its full potential, you obviously got to feed the plant as well, and so on. So, of course, it's a huge generalization, but if you want to learn more about specific plants and what conditions they want and how to care for them, I have a playlist called Plant Spotlights where I look at just one plant. I follow the plant's entire journey over many years, show you visual representation of that, and then I'm going to talk to you about all of my care tips and so on. So check that out, and I'll link it at the end screen. Now that we know how to mature a plant, if you have decided on the back of this video that maybe you don't want to mature some of these plants because you're a little bit intimidated by the space commitment that they might pose, we can just do the opposite. So don't give it optimal conditions. The main one you can really play with is light exposure. Maybe take it a little bit further away from the grow light or further away from the window so it gets less light, and then less light will mean that the plant is less likely to mature. Still feed it, but maybe feed it a weaker dilution of nutrients. Maybe instead of growing it up a moss pole, grow it up a pole that is not a true extension of the pot, but then you also don't get any propagation benefits, which means that you need to chop up your plant more frequently, which means you introduce more shock. More shock means less continuous maturity. Propagate your plant. Overall, if you don't want your plant to mature, instead of continuously growing it, maybe chop it into single node cuttings and let it reshoot and grow a lush pole instead. On a lush pole with multiple cuttings, they're all fighting for light, nutrients, and space as well, so you automatically kind of keep them a little bit bonsai due to competition. You can bonsai them by giving them a pot that's too small so it can't expand its root system any further, like I did with my Thaumatophyllum, even though I would not really consider that bonsai anymore. But you kind of get the gist. Basically do the opposite of what my tips were to mature them in the first place. Anyway, I had a lot of fun filming this video. I wanted to do this for a long time, but I'm always really hesitant in bringing all of my big plants out into the living room because it is such a mission to even move them here without destroying their leaves. And now I need to put them back without bumping into walls and countertops and other plants and the petioles taking each other out and so on. So wish me luck. Please also make sure you give this video a thumbs up, leave a nice comment down below and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And hopefully this video has inspired you to come back and learn more from me. Happy growing and take care.